FreeMMOStation.com.
What's going on, friends and family? My name is Skylent, and I play games and stuff. I focus on MMOs, multiplayer games. It's kind of like my thing. It's what I do, and hopefully you enjoy that. But yeah, we're trying to have some fun here with Final Fantasy XIV. This is going to be my first impressions. Now, this first impression is not going to be live. I actually did stream it live for over 8 hours. I think it's between 12 hours, yeah. And overall, my experience was kind of positive, kind of, sort of, a little bit. There's definitely some ups and downs. There's some things to talk about. But anyways, I have to do this like a post-edit sort of video because, well, thanks to me streaming, I found out that the cutscenes are actually copyrighted. So tragically, and I do want to mention this because in today's age, a lot of people play games socially, and part of that social interaction is streaming and doing video content. And very much, you know, this affects us here. Yeah, I can't show you any of the cutscenes. However, the cutscenes were like half of the game. The story, the actual storied content, the cinematics, that sort of stuff is big in this game. There's a lot of it. However, I can't show you any of it. It probably would fill half of this video, honestly. It's a lot of cutscenes. There is a lot of dialogue, quest text, stuff like that. But I can't really show you that because I don't know what is and what is not copyrighted, which is just really tragic. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the audio. I'm talking specifically the video content. So yeah, I don't get to show any of that. However, cutscenes are really big. Now, this is going to be on the leveling experience from level 1 to 17 or 18, and this is going into all the way to my first dungeon, completing my first dungeon, you know, that whole leveling introduction experience, and then this is just my rant, okay? And I think this is really appropriate, and this is a good time to talk about the leveling in MMOs, period, because Final Fantasy XIV has probably the most cliche, boring, and usual leveling that I've ever experienced. Now, I do a lot of these first impressions, so I go through this a lot. And there's some games that are not very good, you know, honestly and admittedly, they're not very fantastic MMOs in terms of like what an actual MMO is. But for my first impressions, I can have some really good first impressions. You know, they can be cinematic, they can be explosive. There's some games that I feel do first impressions really well, and you know, actually, World of Warcraft, amazing first impressions. Undead Starting Zone is hands down the best. Guild Wars 2, also amazingly well put together, cinematic, storied sort of introduction there. And there's some games that are a little bit more mechanical, a little bit more intense, you know, for their introductions, and some games are a little bit slower paced, maybe they're a little bit more storied, and some are both, you know, some are just the best of both worlds. But going into Final Fantasy XIV, I knew it was going to be slower paced, and I had already done a little bit of the intro, you know, sequence before, and I was so bored out of my brains that I actually did not continue playing past like the first 10 minutes. I was just not into it, okay? So at the very beginning of Final Fantasy XIV, you get just like these really cheesy cutscenes that just don't need to be there. But essentially, the first 15 minutes of the game, the intro cutscene thing, I don't know, they were trying to be like Skyrim or something. You're on a wagon and you're just conversating with these people. It's pointless, it's meaningless. It just should just not be there. And there's actually a lot of interactions, these like, I guess there's, I want to say cinematic, but they don't feel cinematic. There's just a lot of story elements in this game that's kind of thrown at you. You know, tons of name dropping, lots of terminology that just get thrown on you. That just really, in my opinion, I feel is honestly just kind of okay, maybe not mistranslated, but it's awkwardly translated. Maybe in Japanese, this flows so much better, but they just throw quest text at you like crazy. I mean, books. Okay, maybe not full books, but you know what I'm saying, right? Intense amount of quest text, lots of cutscenes, and a lot of it is really boring and dull. And I understand it's the start of an MMO, but I mean, even old, you know, ever since starting with Cataclysm, World of Warcraft is, like, you know, levels 1 to 20 is incredibly climactic and actually cinematic and explosive and intense. And some of the stories are really hard-hitting and really good. And of course, you know, the World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy are actually pretty similar games in a lot of ways. They are subscription-based games that do focus on their endgame partied content. So their raiding content, that's what they do, that's what they focus on. And I have to say, I still have to give it to the much older game, World of Warcraft, for having a much easier, you know, mechanical, like maybe the game feel-wise for leveling, because it's much freer. You get more abilities faster and there's more freedom. And also just story as well. So this game, yes, it is supposed to be storied, and I did stream this, so I had a lot of opinions thrown my way while streaming here, and a lot of people said it gets much better later on, you know, the story and everything, and I know it does. In fact, I put it on my top 10 RPG MMO list on my personal channel, Skylent Games there, because I know it has a good story. I've watched a lot of it, like cutscenes, and I watch a lot of people play it, like Mr. Happy Gaming. I've watched people play this game, you know, the end game, the raids and everything. That looks really engrossing and really fun, and I can tell right now from my leveling experience, that is definitely where the game focuses on. And I don't mean just like they have a general focus. I mean like literally the whole game. Everything about what makes this game an actual game and actually worth playing is 110% entirely in the end game dungeon content. Everything else about this game is probably completely lackluster. Now, I didn't do the crafting over and over again. People said the crafting was kind of interesting. And from what I remember, the life skills and the crafting and trading and stuff like that was supposed to be really important in the original Final Fantasy XIV. Oh, which, by the way, if you don't know, Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn is literally a remade version of Final Fantasy XIV. So, yeah, kind of like a completely different game. Anyways, they actually entwined that with the story. So yeah, the story for Final Fantasy XIV, as you might imagine, is probably going to be told awkwardly, you know, being Final Fantasy tradition to be vague and weird, but it's supposed to be good, okay? So I understand that, and the end game and all that stuff is supposed to be amazing. And I do want to clarify that my first impressions, obviously, I can't play the end game. However, from what I've seen from streams and from playing it myself, it's very clear that this game is just kind of skating by bare bones with its MMO features, and it's really truly a dungeon diver. Okay, so with that, I played the Lancer class, the Spear class, and a lot of people said that might be one of the more boring classes. However, there was actually still some mechanics I was able to sort of piece together in my brain from playing this class. So this class, and I know some other classes, and I think maybe most classes, have these things called positionals. So some attacks will do more damage depending on your orientation, your position to the enemies, or the enemy's orientation to you. So if the enemy is facing away from you, you're behind them. Some attacks are going to do more damage from the side, behind, and, you know, stuff like that. Immediately, they introduce, you know, a lot of the kind of, I like skill shots, sort of, not with my class personally, but, you know, the enemies, the danger circles, the danger cones, the red circles that you have to evade and get out of. Now, this game, it really holds your hand. It is so easy. You know, the only time I died, I had to purposely run into a group of things that, you know, were right around my level, and I just had to let them wail on me forever. This game is super easy early. It completely holds your hand. The tutorial is super long. I mean, I had to play for over 8 hours to do my first dungeon, and I play MMOs, right? I'm pretty good at games, period, you know? And I play MMOs, and normally I could just rush through them and do my first dungeon. You know, I can actually think of every other MMO that has had dungeons, and especially that is a dungeon-focused, you know, dungeon diving type of MMO. In my first impressions, even live first impressions, like in the first 30 minutes, or at least in the first hour, I would be able to get into my first dungeon. But Final Fantasy, I didn't get to do my first dungeon until my 8-hour mark. That's how slow-paced it is, and that is how hand-holdy it is. Like, it takes you so long to kill things, you know, skill shots or whatever, the danger circles come out so slow, and it's just really slow. To kind of put into perspective how slow this game is, and you might see from the gameplay, the global cooldown, which is, it's a cooldown for, obviously, maybe not so obviously, all of your skills, your global skills. So if you press a skill, then you won't be able to use another skill for 2.5 seconds. Now there are some skills, and I was able to get at least 2, one's a buff though, so that doesn't count. There are some skills that don't, you know, adhere to that. So later on, I'm assuming you get much more, and your rotations become a little bit more convoluted depending on your positions. And there is since there is a global cooldown, that will actually play into, you know, you picking and choosing the rock, paper, scissors of what ability to use when. Because in other games, maybe like Guild Wars, you don't really have global cooldowns. It's kind of a little bit different. I mean, there is a global cooldown, but not really. And some skills lock you out of using other skills and stuff like that. So it's way more complicated, but for the most part, in games like Guild Wars or World of Warcraft, you just kind of press all the buttons and, you know, you do a lot of stuff. In this game, you don't do that. And even though I barely have any skills, there was some times where I wanted to use all my skills or use like multiple skills, but I had to pick and choose which one I wanted to use, which one would benefit the team, blah, blah, blah. And I barely touched that, but still I had a taste of it. And I can understand how the end game can become really, you know, it can become like a brain blast sort of. Like you actually got to think. And you have to actually position and move around in this game. And, you know, you can be slowed and stuff and things, and the circles can be really big. But, you know, for the most part, I don't know how severe the game gets. I don't know how easy it is at the end game or how hard difficult it can be. All I know is the potential's there, and from what I've seen in other videos, you know, yeah, it's there. So anyways, for the most part, guys, all I can really say is for my first impressions, my experience, I can really only rant and kind of come from an emotional space and place and just say that it didn't really feel that good. It really felt cheesy. In fact, there are some games like Echo of Soul, which I consider a very mediocre MMO that was very cheesy, that I actually moved through it much quicker and maybe had a little bit more fun leveling in that game. There's definitely some cheesy games out there that overall I would not call good MMOs, but the first impressions were definitely better than Final Fantasy XIV. I'm really unsure why that the game overall has like this sort of screen of mediocrity for me. I guess it's kind of the PC master race in me, but it really feels like this game was kind of built for PS3, and I feel like a lot of the systems in place were because the game actually focuses on console development. For instance, the graphics overall for the characters look really good. I like the cleanliness, the cartooniness of it. The lighting engine, though, is really not good. The lighting on the characters never is like perfect. It doesn't really ever look that great. I tried taking lots of screenshots and it was super awkward. And then second, the textures on anything other than the characters is ugly. Like, it's just not good. It's really like aliasing issues, and the textures themselves just don't have a, like, it just doesn't match the art style, I think, of the characters. It just doesn't look that great. It just kind of makes me feel, you know, not great. It's like, I don't even care anymore. It's like, I don't even, what? Anyways, so a lot of the game just kind of feels placed together, like different art styles almost. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. But anyways, moving on about the art style and everything, the overall performance was pretty good, but there's lots of instancing, right? Like the game runs okay, but not perfect, and definitely not perfect for how instanced the game is. It's incredibly linear and incredibly instanced. I mean, like, you're gonna be doing a loading screen, move a little bit, loading screen, you know, move a little bit, teleport over here, loading screen. Like, even just cities have multiple instances inside of them. And that's ridiculous. I mean, I thought like Guild Wars 2 was ridiculous because, you know, a major city was a single instance, and then, you know, every zone is a single instance. I'm somebody who likes the World of Warcraft style, where an entire continent is an instance, you know, an entire continent or the entire world or something like that, like PlanetSide 2. Fuck loading screens unless you're in a dungeon or something like that. But this game, no, this game feels... It feels like if you ever played like Fantasy Star Online, it feels like if you've ever played, you know, like an action RPG, it's incredibly instanced, okay? So if it is so instanced, I just don't understand why the textures in the world around doesn't look that good. I'm assuming so that the file size is really, really small and so that it runs really well on consoles. But I will say, you know, the characters themselves and the creatures, the monsters, the characters, the players, the NPCs, the facial animations, just all the physical animations are really, really good. Like, the game looks great. Of course, this isn't a full review by any means, so, you know, that could be doctored. Like, maybe the intro areas look a little bit better than maybe some other areas. I don't know that, but anyways, all I can say is that from my first impressions, the game's characters look freaking amazing. And of course, you know, that's Final Fantasy, true to Final Fantasy, the characters, the monsters, they're gonna be ridiculous, and they look really, really good too. But the game is just really standstilly. It's not a standstill game. Like, you can move. There are some mechanics. I know with the Lancer, I was able to kind of move through people, wait for a cooldown, and come back in and trade pretty well like that. I don't think there's proper kiting in the game. I didn't see any archers, and mages just kind of stood still and blasted everything. So, you know, maybe later on you could do stuff like that. But for what I played, it didn't, I don't know. I just kind of moved in like a figure eight and just wrecked everything, sort of. So it seems like there might be potential for that, but it doesn't seem as sort of in your face as something like Guild Wars or even World of Warcraft did. So yeah, you know, about that, the game just kind of feels slower. It feels like it's designed in a way, it just feels, okay guys, it just feels like a console game. And I'm trying to, you know, explain it in every way possible, but yeah, I'm gonna keep coming back to that point. I might say it a little bit too much, it might be redundant. Oh yeah, by the way, on the screen, it might look like I'm playing on PlayStation 4, but I just have my PlayStation 4 controller plugged in, so I could see how it plays with a controller. And yeah, no, it plays pretty okay with a controller. However, I feel like the game is half designed to play on a controller, and then at the same time, it's still not good enough. Like, using the map is incredibly weird and awkward. I was so frustrated with the map and the menus. Now, actually playing the game, locking on, you know, talking to people, interacting with the world, that's okay, that's fine. But I will say, it always felt like I had to press like a button too many times to do one action. And I understand like actually utilizing sort of mutator buttons. So like you hold right trigger and then you use the D-pad or the face buttons to use actions. And I understand that. So you press right trigger and you can do certain actions, or you let go of right trigger and then you can do different actions. So it basically multiplies the buttons you have on your controller. And I'm actually used to that playing, I actually used to play MMOs like Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2. I actually played with a controller before they even had controller support, because I'm weird like that. So I understand how to play controller, like with a controller in games that generally, you know, maybe it's not best to play with a controller, but this game is supposedly designed with a controller in mind, and yet still, the menus were kind of garbage, and playing the game was okay, but I think it could be done better. I think it could be done much, much better. And obviously, I feel like this game is meant for PS3 and PS4. I feel like it's really designed for the PlayStation 4 console, just based on like the way it looks and a lot of the, I guess if you can say the graphics, like a lot of the kind of tricks they use in order to make the game run better and look better. It's a lot of stuff that I've seen in a lot of other, specifically like PlayStation kind of games, in games that are like ported to console and stuff like that. So this game it just doesn't feel like a full PC title. It just doesn't feel like a Guild Wars 2. It doesn't feel like a World of Warcraft. It doesn't feel like a big open MMO. It kind of just feels like a very instance dungeon diver. And normally we call those action RPGs. But you know what this game kind of lacks? It lacks a little bit of action, okay? Now this game kind of makes up for that with spell effects, but does it? Does it really? Here's one of my complaints, and I know I'm just kind of early level, you know, later on things are going to become a little bit more distinct and overall better, and more unique. But so far, it seems like a lot of the spell effects are just kind of bland. Like, I mean, they're big, and they're uproarious. Like, sometimes I can't even see what's going on the screen. You know, Guild Wars 2 does that as well. But Guild Wars 2, like, every single ability has, like, a unique flavor or element or, you know, proper, like, physical attribute to it that you actually feel, you know, game feel-wise, and that you see. You know, a fireball that explodes, there's explosions. You know, you actually have lightning and all these different elements, and I understand that, you know, there is kind of that inside of Final Fantasy as well, but things don't feel quite as physical. Things are a little bit more ethereal, and it just kind of doesn't make a lot of sense thematically as well. So the Lancer class, like when you do your buff, it's just like this sort of random colors and wisps and magic and bull crap that just kind of spills out or something. I don't know, a lot of spells in this game just kind of feel like they're big effects, but they're not like physically like distinguished. They're not actually constrained in a proper artistic direction. It doesn't seem like they actually kind of knew what they were doing. They just kind of threw in a bunch of effects. And in fact, like, I feel like that's kind of the design for the entire Final Fantasy that I've seen so far. It's just like, there's just like a bunch of people that have just random outfits and random things, and there's random creatures, sort of. And don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near as random as Terra. Like, Terra is totally discombobulated and has just like seriously random creatures that don't make any sense everywhere. It's just, there's really no continuity there at all. Final Fantasy, there is a little bit. You know, you're gonna have salamanders in the lake and stuff like that, but still, at the same time, I don't know, man, a lot of things just kind of don't feel as whole as they could be. And I know, actually, Terra emulated Final Fantasy in a lot of ways. In Final Fantasy itself, the whole genre is very out there. Like, it's very weird and almost cosmic and crazy. Like, it just, you know, you gotta kind of separate a little bit of, like, what you think would be, I guess, kind of realistic. I mean, the game's called Final Fantasy, and it is a fantasy MMO. But there's other games that are a little bit more thematically obvious. You know, World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2 are much more grounded. Final Fantasy, for its mechanics, seems like a very grounded game, and it literally is a grounded game. You don't really, you know, fly in the air like Blade and Soul. But when it comes to the artistic direction, it's a little bit more out there. Again, less than Terra, but definitely way more out there than something like Guild Wars. So there's that, guys. I think I've kind of covered everything and how I feel about the game so far. I feel like they just kind of borrowed a lot of ideas from a lot of other MMOs. Oh yeah, and by the way, guys, if it seems like I'm kind of skipping on what the mechanics and stuff are of the game, I kind of assume you know what Final Fantasy XIV is like, because there's a million billion videos out there that really explain the game proper. You know, the fate system, or how PvP works, or dungeons and stuff like that. You know, overall, it's just like the fate system. It's kind of like Guild Wars 2 dynamic events, except nowhere near as epic, nowhere near as massive. And there's lots of stuff like that, where it's like they kind of just took ideas from other MMOs, especially World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2, and they use those ideas to kind of reinvent, you know, Final Fantasy XIV with Realm Reborn. There's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, it's very obvious that they're kind of tacked on, and it's very obvious that a lot of this world is very much designed with the constraint of consoles. And so, in the end, your first impressions of Final Fantasy XIV is probably not going to be positive. It's probably going to feel like a burden, However, luckily, the game now allows you to play for free with no time constraints up to level 35. So you're only probably going to be wasting 1 month of subscription, which is a lot of money, you know? But when you do purchase the game, you do get a free month. So level up to level 35, which is going to be a slog. It's going to be boring. And then you're going to have to level up to level 60 after that, which is probably going to take you a month, you know, if you play average. And then you're going to have to spend $15 more. You're going to have to subscribe to the game to then really begin playing the game. So that's going to cost a lot of money. And tragically here, you know, this channel is called FreeMMOStation, or FreeMMOStation asked me to do this video, and I want to really kind of comment on, you know, since I'm playing the free version of the game, a lot of the times I'll say, you know, actually, like Guild Wars 2 or RuneScape, those games, they have limitations, but they're totally fine, like complete experiences in ways, if you have a certain mindset, playing them for free. You don't have to spend any money, and their experience is whole for free. But in Final Fantasy, even if you do buy the game, I can't say that it's a complete experience. Literally, the whole game is the end game. There's really, I want to say, almost nothing of value playing the game and leveling up other than learning the game. And yet it's so extended that even people that probably have never played an MMO, that maybe have, you know, at least have some idea of what this game might have, you know, in store for them, they'll be able to blow through this content and they'll be able to learn really quickly. It's really not necessary. So all in all, it's almost like, you know, you're spending a lot of time, you're spending a lot of money just to then get the chance to see if you want to play the game. So that's really what I'm commenting on. I'm commenting on the first impressions of the game because this is my first impressions. There's probably a lot that the game has to offer, and I really do want to play that, especially with the expansion coming out. But that's a lot of money, that's a lot of time, and you have to already know that you want to play the end game, and you have to understand that it's not going to be too dissimilar from World of Warcraft, or the rating in a lot of other games that are endgame rating games, you know? So maybe if you've never played a game like that, well, you have to know that Final Fantasy is a lot more slower paced, a lot more tactical, and completely focused on that endgame hardcore, you know, dungeon content. So yeah, actually just doing the first impressions, you probably still won't be able to tell if you like the game or not. Because I feel like the early game doesn't do it justice. A lot of people in the comments are going to tell you, yeah, the early game does not do it justice. This is not the real game. This is not the game at all. And that's kind of just where we're at, okay? So I tried to do my job the best that I could. I explained my thoughts and feelings. That's my rant. And overall, I feel like Final Fantasy XIV could be much, much better. But, you know, in my opinion, I feel like the game needs another rebirth. But then again, if you play this on PS4, this is probably the best console MMO that you can play. It plays really fantastically with controllers. I think Terra is definitely going to compete with it because Terra is also an endgame MMO and it's much faster paced, and also it's more mechanically intensive too. So yeah, Final Fantasy XIV, a sub fee is going to be fighting Terra, which is coming up soon. And overall, I think I might actually recommend Terra because, you know, we're here at FreeMMOStation. We like us some free MMOs. But overall, even if it wasn't free, maybe. Anyways, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I gave you mine, and that's all I can do. Remember, it's a first impressions. I had fun streaming it, and if you do want to see me stream games, new games, free MMOs, or otherwise, I do that over on my personal channel, Skylint Games. Yeah, on YouTube. I stream on YouTube. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty hype. But anyways, guys, I just want to say thanks again for watching, and hopefully you guys had fun. My name's Skylint, and I'll see you in the next one.